Jacob has taught Enos his language in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. This is significant because we all can look in our lives and say, we actually probably have all been similarly taught by parents or loved ones or leaders who are just. And actually, it's an interesting word. Just has a covenantal context, meaning people who teach you covenants and covenantal language and how to be in covenant with God. And you were making this really interesting comment about these two words, and there's a little connecting word you were talking to me about.
Yeah, look at this. So he tells us that his father was a just man or a righteous, covenant-keeping man. And he is so grateful for that because, why? What did his dad do? He taught me in his language, in my father's language. Now, there are a couple of ways to interpret this, and I don't know exactly what Enos meant when he wrote that, but it seems to imply that he's probably not saying, wow, I am sure glad that my dad taught me Hebrew, because that's the spoken tongue of the Nephites. The reality is if you're born into a family, you're raised speaking that language. And I don't know that Enos would make a big deal of, wow, I'm glad Dad taught me this vernacular tongue that everybody around me speaks. It could be that he's referring to a language that is much more important as far as we're concerned with reference to the Book of Mormon, because in Mosiah chapter 1, we find out that the brass plates were written in Egyptian. We know that Nephi's writing in Egyptian. Later on, Moroni is going to tell us that he's writing in Reformed Egyptian. So you have this language skill that is being passed down father to son of the record keepers to be able to read and write in Egyptian, which would not have been simple for Hebrew speaking and writing people. It's a step up. Now, those of us today reading this in the Book of Mormon, some of you might be thinking to yourself, that's good trivia, but really who cares? The reality is, when you open up the Bible, or even when you open up the Book of Mormon written in kind of archaic English, this is not the language in every case that children are raised hearing and speaking, and so it can be very, very difficult to understand. Kind of like reading Old Testament Hebrew prophets like Isaiah. It's hard to understand, and it means that parents have the opportunity to teach their children after the manner of these words that aren't in our common tongue. So in my mind, when I read this, I put on my cap as a father and think, wow, I have a responsibility to teach my children in the language of the Scriptures so that they can unlock the power that will help them recognize God's revelations in their own life and show them the fount from which they can receive a remission of their sins, to go back to Nephi. So I love the fact that Enos is acknowledging right out of the gate the same thing Nephi acknowledged. Having been born of goodly parents, therefore, having been taught somewhat in all the learning of my father, I think that has to include somewhere the ability to interact with and understand Scripture.